I had a couple of requests for more videos using texture with some questions about the texture, so I'm going to show you that now. This one might be a little bit long, this video, so if you're not interested in textures, feel free to stop watching now. If you are interested, hopefully this will help. A couple of questions. I talked about brightening up the picture with the texture before, choosing a texture that would lighten it, and the question was asked, why not just use curves or levels or whatever to lighten it instead of the texture? And you definitely could do that. Texture does not have to be to lighten or darken a photo, but it can be. The textures can be used just for background effect, just for texture in the photo. It can be used to change the color of your photo or the lightness or the darkness, and you don't even have to use it for the same reasons all the time. It could be just the way you work. Sometimes you want to put a certain effect on your photo because of the texture, and sometimes you'll just want the texture on there. So I'm going to show you a few different examples. Oh, also it was asked, like, what about a photo makes me want to use texture, and how do I choose what texture to use? So I'm going to show you 3 different examples of photos that I might see and think this would be great with texture. And again, it's a lot just your style and what you like best anyway. So this photo right here, I thought there's this blank green wall. I mean, well, it's a brick wall, but there's this blank wall here, and it's a senior session, so I thought, let's just make it fun. We could add some texture here. So I've got the photo opened, and just because this is bugging me, I'm going to straighten this up just a bit. You don't have to. I'm just a little weird about it. I like it to either be definitely off kilter or straight on. So I'm going to open up my textures, and I'm going to pick one that has design in it, just because I think that that would be fun for this photo. So I'll choose this texture right here, and I just got this free from the deviantart.com, and I'm going to, it's got stuff on the bottom and I don't want to worry about that, so I'm just going to crop that and then select all and copy, and then I'm going to paste it onto here. And some files that you use are not very big. Like this one, you can see it's small. Usually they'll work out okay. If they're not big enough, you might have, if you tried to print it big, then it wouldn't work out well. But this will look pixelated right now, but when I get it set, it won't. So I'm just going to put it along the wall like that, and see, it goes back to not pixelated. And then choose my blending mode, and you can choose anything. Overlay looks like this. You can see the brick through it, but it has the texture over the top. You can try soft light, which is usually just a softer version of that. Hard light is more intense. This one might be fun for this picture. If you want to darken or lighten, you can use darken, multiply for darken, or lighten and screen. Usually it doesn't show up as much with those, but different textures work differently. Just depends on the effect that you want. So for this one, I think I will choose the hard light, and then I'm going to bring the opacity back until I like how it looks. And then I'm going to add a layer just to erase this part right here, because obviously I didn't straighten that up well. I was following this line up here, but it looks like this might be a bit of a crooked picture, so we can't achieve perfection. So I'll get my brush, make sure it's black, and I'm just going to erase the texture from everything except the brick. So in this case, I'm just using texture to add fun to a picture. I'm not affecting her at all. I'm not having it go over her. And you could apply the texture again to this side to have it show, or what I'm going to do is just flatten this and choose my clone stamp. I know, I'm such a cheater here. And then I'm just going to choose that to sample and run this texture along there. So the effect is there, and that was a lot easier than pasting the texture again. So that's just one way you can use texture in your photos. This wouldn't have to be a picture. You could just put more texture over the brick, or you could do a different picture or words, or anything can be overlaid onto here. So there's one example. And this one, if you have something that's a really pretty scene, then sometimes it's fun to put a texture over that just for a different look. So I'm going to open, and it's hard sometimes to know what texture to pick, and it's a lot trial and error. You might pick one and think, oh, this one's going to look good, and then it doesn't. So pick one that you think might look good, get familiar with your textures, and then if it doesn't look good, then you can take it right off and try something else. I'm going to try this one. This will give us a color effect, and you can see it has a lot of color in it and a lot of depth and not a whole lot of pattern. So this texture is more for that color aspect. Transforming it, just fitting it right to the picture. Okay, and then I can choose my blending mode. We talked about these. Overlay is one of my favorites, and that's how it looked before, and that's after. So as you can see, it's not a ton of texture on the photo. You can see some texture over here, but it does give a lot of richness and depth to the photo and makes it interesting. So you could do that, and if you didn't like this texture, you can just pull this to the garbage can and erase it right there and throw it away. But I think I'm going to leave it. Just check these other blending modes out. Now this one gave it a dramatic effect and almost looks like a sunset because of the colors that were in there. And if I wanted those colors, I could leave it there and just do that. So far I liked the overlay best. You can always leave it on normal also. Normal is just the texture itself without any blending mode, and just pull the opacity back. That works well for some photos, obviously not for this one. But really just try the different blending modes till you find the one that works for you and the texture and the picture. So I'm going to make sure that the texture is off of her face. So I choose the lasso tool and I draw around her. This doesn't have to be perfect. I just want to make sure that there's no texture on her face or her skin especially. And then choose filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and this blurs the texture but leaves the color there. And then I deselect. So there's before and there's after. And just so you can kind of see what might happen, if I added a layer mask and erased the texture off of her, then she then becomes like a different color from the background. And you might want that, but I kind of liked the warmth that it gave her. So I'm going to paint that back on. That's the fun thing about layer masks. So much better than just erasing, because if you don't like what you erased, you can just put it right back on by coloring the same color as the mask is. We have white over here and white there, so I'm painting it back on. So there's what that one looks like with the texture. You wouldn't even have to run an action at this point if you don't want to, because there's our before and it looks much more finished and artistic now just from that texture. One more example. This one I might choose because the background is very simple and I could add a texture just kind of like the last photo to add dimension and depth to it and excitement. But sometimes if it's a busy background, if there's lots of things in focus in the background, then textures don't look great on it. Of course, you could try and see what different things look like, but that's another thing I look for, is simple backgrounds that will take a texture well. And let's see. Let's try this one. This is from Paint the Moon. This is one of her texture samples. Okay, this is always the fun part, see what it does to your photo. And this one does a lot of interesting things. So this is what it looks like on overlay. Let's try some different blending modes. As you can see, every texture really does something completely different. And so if you find textures that you like the effects on most photos, then maybe keep those in a favorite so you have your go-to textures, but it's always good to try new ones for fun too. We could try a darken. Sometimes the textures do really strange things. So I'm going to put it on the overlay and pull the opacity back and check my before and after. I'm deciding now if I liked the effect that it put on her skin, and I don't particularly love it, so I'm going to add the layer mask. Grab a brush, make sure it's black, and I'm just going to brush the whole texture off of her. Now if I had liked what it was doing to her skin, then I would have done the lasso tool and then blurred the texture so it kept that color there. But this kind of gives an interesting background. Now that it's off of her, I might want the opacity up just a little bit. But that makes it interesting and something different. It might not be the perfect background for this, but it's something to try. And just for fun, let's run an action and just play around a little bit. I would have fixed blemishes and stuff first in real life, but just to save time. Actions really can help with the vintage look. Just play around with the action a little bit to make it work for the photo. There we go. Here's our before everything, and there's after using texture. And it's fun with senior photos and things like that. They like textures and this kind of look. So there's the 3 examples with texture. Hopefully that helped you know how I decide which photos to use texture on and which textures to use. I know I've said this over and over again, but it's so much trial and error and just seeing what works for you. And sometimes you'll be surprised. I was a little bit surprised how this texture ended up looking on the photo, but it ended up looking pretty cool in the end. So let me know if you have any more questions on textures.